1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good. My name is David Hawkins. I'm a senior financial economics major from Wilmington, Delaware. And before we move forward with today's program, I just wanted to take the opportunity to acknowledge some amazing people in the room tonight. First, our university provost, Dr. DeLauder. Next, we have Miss Jackie Griffith, Mr. Christopher Knight, who is the Chief Deputy Secretary of State. Now, moving forward, I would like to introduce an amazing person as well, Mr. Brian P. McKeon. Now, Mr. McKeon was sworn in Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources on March 19, 2021. Prior to assuming to his position as Deputy Secretary, McKeon was a Senior Director of the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement in Washington, D.C. McKeon served in several national security positions in the Obama-Biden administration as Principal Deputy Under Secretary National Security Council and Deputy National Security Advisor to then Vice President Biden. McKeon also served for more than 20 years in the U.S. Senate, including 12 years as chief counsel to the Democratic members of the Committee on Foreign Relations. McKeon received a JD from the Georgetown University Law Center and a BA from the University of Notre Dame. Mr. McKeon, thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here on this rainy day, and I know it's getting close to exam time, so you have to dust off some of those books you've barely opened and try to figure out how to get through the exam. I know how it goes. I went to law school at night, and working full-time in the Senate for one of the senators from Delaware named Biden, and I got pretty good at cramming at the end of the semester and teaching myself the class for all the classes I didn't actually attend. Thank you very much to DSU for hosting us. I know the provost, Ms. Dr. DeLauder, was here, but she had to go. And as I think was mentioned, the Deputy Secretary of State for the state of Delaware is here. Just to confuse you all, you have two Deputy Secretaries of State here. Chris Knight is here. He's in the back. And if you don't hear something from me that sounds interesting about working in the U.S. Department of State, then the Delaware Department of State is looking for talent. So Chris is here to steal some of the recruits that we're trying to make. So why am I here? And why are you here? So let me just do a quick poll. How many seniors in the room? Wow, a lot. How many juniors? How many sophomores? How many freshmen? How many high school students? Yeah. Whoa. I feel like somebody put their hand up more than once. So all of you who are not seniors are way ahead of where I was when I was in college in the early 1980s. I was not giving, and those of you in high school are way ahead of things. So I was not thinking at all about anything outside what I was going to do next. So I give you all credit for being here. So the reason I came to Delaware State is a couple reasons. One, we are always looking ahead to trying to bring people who want to serve in the Department of State. Now, you're not going to be in the Department of State in 2 years or 3 years, most of you, and probably not in 5 if you really aspire to do it. And why do I say that? Because the average age of our workforce when they come in the Foreign Service is 32. But I'm here to plant a seed to give you sort of a sense of what it's like to work for the federal government and work in international affairs and maybe what it's like to work in the State Department and what we're looking for in our department. We have a pretty big department. How many how many of you, and I don't want to embarrass you with this question, how many of you wonder, what does the United States State Department do? Because I would have certainly had that question when I was in high school. Okay, so let me give a quick explanation of what is the United States Department of State. We engage in foreign policy for the president, and we engage in having diplomatic relations with foreign governments. So we have platforms overseas called United States embassies or consulates. We have an embassy in almost every country in the world, and we have, in some countries, we also have consulates. So like in France, we have an embassy in Paris, and then we have a few consulates around the country. The head of the embassy is the United States ambassador, and he or she is the face of the United States in that country, dealing with the host government on any number of issues that we have between our two countries. In Washington, in our headquarters, the Secretary of State is a guy named Tony Blinken. He's the chief diplomat for the United States, and he spends probably 2 weeks out of every 4 traveling around the world, visiting foreign countries, meeting with other foreign ministers, or going to international conferences, and talking about issues that are at the center of American foreign policy. So right now there's a lot of attention and time being given to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and so he does a lot of meetings in Europe with his counterparts in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. He's visited Ukraine a couple of times since Russia's invasion. He goes to international summits with President Biden. He was just at a meeting of what's called the Group of 20, which is focused primarily on financial stability of world markets, which is hosted by Indonesia, and then they went to some other summits in some East Asian countries. So the whole federal government is quite big, lots of departments. Our department is focused on American foreign policy, representing America to the world. We have 25,000 Americans who work for us, and then we have 50,000 people who work for us in our local embassies and consulates who are mostly foreign nationals, although some Americans are in that category who are what we call locally engaged staff. So we have 75,000 people who work for us in 180 countries at about 270 posts. So that's sort of a quick snapshot of what the State Department does. I am here because we, as I say, we want to look out to the future and get people interested and excited in international affairs or thinking about a career in the State Department, because we always want to have a pipeline of people who are applying, and we want people from all around the country, from all walks of life, and we want people in particular from minority serving institutions and HBCUs like Delaware State to think about it, because the State Department has a very proud history, but one of the history parts of it that we're not so proud is that it hasn't always been that diverse. And President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken have made it very clear that we represent America, so we need to look like America. And that's part of our strength as a country, that we have people who've come from all over, and unless you're a descendant of a Native American, everybody's an immigrant of some sort or another. They've come from have an immigrant story, and people come from different walks of life, and it is our comparative advantage in the world to be able to have the full breadth and scope of America represent us. And so I'm here to tell you that even if you have never given a thought to international affairs or serving abroad, there's lots of different jobs in the State Department for you. And so I'm gonna get a little basic and go through some of this and just give you a sense of it. So our core work is done through we have 2 different personnel systems. We have a foreign service and we have a civil service. In the foreign service, you sign up to serve overseas. That's why it's called foreign service. And some of the core work they do is diplomatic work, serving in the United States Embassy, reporting on what's happening in that country, meeting foreign government officials, meeting with civil society, spreading the word about America. Those are what we call generalists. They do specific diplomatic functions of economic or political reporting, or they help manage the platform of the embassy. We also have people who do what is called consular work. They issue visas to people who want to travel to the United States. In a lot of these places, you need to speak the local language because you're going to be interviewing people who are applying. And they also take care of Americans. So if you're an American and you travel overseas and you lose your passport or you get robbed, or God forbid you get arrested, people in the United States Embassy are there to help you. They'll give you a new passport. If you actually have no money, credit card's gone, cash is gone, how do I get home? We'll give you a loan to get home. And that person in the embassy will do that for you. And if, God forbid, you should get arrested in a foreign country, we will visit you in prison and give your family a list of lawyers who can help you navigate the criminal system in that country. So they're taking care of Americans is what consular work is. But then we have a whole bunch of specialties where we need people that don't involve political science or international affairs at all, because we have a big global platform. So we have a law enforcement branch that helps us protect our embassies from foreign threats. And they also investigate passport and visa fraud here in the United States. A lot of people in our law enforcement branch, called Diplomatic Security Service, they come out of the military and it's a second career for them. They still get to carry guns sometimes. You know, they interact with foreign security services. It's kind of familiar work to them. We need medical professionals, doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians, assistants. Why? Because we send our foreign service colleagues and their families overseas, and they're living in some places where the medical systems may not be so great. So we have doctors and nurses on site in our embassies to make sure we look out for the health of our workforce. We need accountants to make sure that we're spending the money the right way, because we get money from Congress and we've got to account for every dollar and explain it. We need facilities managers, because we have these big, complicated embassies that we have to build the security standards and take care of them. So we recruit people from the oil and gas industry in the United States to come be facilities managers. We need engineers to help us design and maintain these complicated buildings. So we have a lot of different skill sets and skill codes. You don't just have to be an international affairs person to do it. The kinds of issues that we work on, I know I've just said basically diplomacy. What is that? In addition to our relationships with other countries, there are a lot of global issues, multilateral issues, that we work through the United Nations or other fora on issues that no one country can solve alone, whether it's climate change, whether it's terrorism, whether it's trafficking of humans, whether it's democracy and human rights, whether it's cyber. There's a whole bunch of different issues you could work on in the Department of State. In addition to I mentioned the Foreign Service to you, we have the Civil Service. Civil Service, those jobs are mostly in Washington doing policy jobs on the same sets of issues. So people in the Foreign Service and the Civil Service mostly work on similar issues or similar skills, have similar skill sets, but the Civil Service employees do not sign up to serve overseas. There's another specialty I should have mentioned that's very important, and many of you may have it or be pursuing it, is we need IT specialists. We need people to run our complicated computer systems and help defend them against cyber actors who want to read our systems and read our emails, and we need these people both in Washington and overseas. Now, if you sign up to serve overseas, I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's not an easy life. You're moving every 2 or 3 years. You're bringing your family, or you're not bringing your family because it's too dangerous to bring your family. You have to learn a new culture, a new language, new city, where's the new grocery store. So it is not a life that's for everyone. But it attracts a lot of people who want the adventure of having the government send you overseas and you get to live in a really cool place for 2 or 3 years and get to see a lot of amazing things. But you should sort of think about it if that's kind of a life that you want to pursue. We are not the only agency that has foreign affairs missions in the United States government, so I don't want to be here and just sell the State Department, although that's where I work. We have a development agency called the Agency for International Development. They do most of our foreign assistance programs. They have a foreign service as well that requires service overseas. The Department of Agriculture has a foreign service. They promote American farm products overseas. The Department of Commerce has a foreign service. Same deal, they're promoting American exports. And then a whole bunch of other agencies, Defense Department, Central Intelligence Agency, the Treasury Department, they all have people who serve overseas in our embassies. So there are lots of different pathways to serve the United States government overseas. So why should you do this? Why would you be interested in this? First of all, it's fun. Honestly, it's fun because you're getting to meet new people, you're getting to travel, you're getting to engage with very talented either teammates in the department or people you deal with overseas. And there's a satisfaction that comes with with public service. Now, I understand your motto is enter to learn and go forth to serve. Now, there are lots of ways to serve the public. I'm not telling you have to serve in the federal government to serve. You can serve in the state government, and you can speak to my colleague Chris about that. You can serve your local community and your local government. You can serve your church. You can serve a nonprofit organization. Lots of ways to serve, but this is one way to serve that's very satisfying. There's an intangible satisfaction that comes with standing behind the flag and wearing the jersey of the United States of America. In the government, in the federal government, the pay it's okay. It's not great. You're not going to make money like you'd make on Wall Street, but it's pretty good, and we have a lot of good benefits. If you serve in the Foreign Service and you go overseas, we pay for your housing, and we pay for your kids' school, K through 12, not university. We have a student loan repayment program because you're in public service. We have good health care. We have something that a lot of private sector companies don't have anymore called a pension. The federal government still has pensions. There's some stability to it because we don't really have layoffs in the government very often. And in the Foreign Service and the Civil Service, there's job protection, so if somebody decides they wake up one day and they want to fire you, it's pretty hard to fire you. You have to go through a process, and it's not like in companies where somebody could wake up one day and say, you know, we just need to make some cuts, or I don't like the way Chris does his job, tell him his last day is Friday. We don't really have that so much in the government. If you're in the career services, I'm a political appointee of President Biden. I can be fired anytime. So there's those benefits. So how do you get there? How do you get to these jobs? And this is where I'm planting the seed, I hope, a little bit, and maybe someday a few of you will pursue one of these things. So to get into the Foreign Service, you have to take a test. It's a written test. You have to write a narrative explaining your story. And not everybody passes it, or certainly not on the first time. I took the Foreign Service exam and I failed. I didn't take it again, and 35 years later, I finally got to the State Department. If you pass after the written part, there's an oral exam as well, an assessment. It's not required that you pass the written to get to the oral stage. It used to be, but we changed that this year. But there's a test. The Civil Service, there's not a test. You have to navigate a website called USA Jobs. It is very hard to figure out. And so I strongly urge you, if you think about doing that, go to your career center and find somebody who can help you navigate USA Jobs, because there's kind of a skill to, how do I write my resume to USA Jobs? We have internships. And this year we started paying our interns, which is huge because it makes a difference for people who can't afford, and their families can't afford to send them to Washington or send them overseas and work for free. So we're not only paying our interns a little more than minimum wage, about $17 an hour, but we're paying for your housing, and we're paying for your plane ticket or bus ticket to Washington, wherever you live, and if you serve overseas, we'll pay for your transportation overseas. That is a game changer. We've had a real change already in seeing what types of folks are coming through the internship program that would not have come before. We have some fellowship programs that will pay for your grad school, and then you commit to service for 5 years. It's a little like ROTC. Not as big as the ROTC program, but they were designed, many of these were designed to diversify our workforce. We have two that have been around for 25 years. One's named for a former congressman named Charlie Rangel from New York, and one's named for a former diplomat named Tom Pickering. And it was really designed to get people from underrepresented communities into the Foreign Service. And it's worked. About 1 out of 9, 1 out of 10 of our current Foreign Service officers have come through these programs. So now we've expanded it. We've just set one up for the Civil Service. We've set one up for our Law Enforcement Bureau, the Diplomatic Security Bureau. And in the last couple of years, we increased by 50% the Pickering and Wrangell fellowship programs. So that's another way to come in. We also have an IT fellowship program that will pay for your graduate studies, and then you come and work for us for 5 years in our IT branch. There are other pathways into the government and into the department, and we have a website called careers.state.gov. And in the back, who will probably stay longer and chat with anybody who wants to chat with you, is Darion Akins. I said that right, sorry. Darion, raise your hand. Darion is, he's a Foreign Service officer. And he's doing a 2-year job as what's called a diplomat in residence. And he's in residence at a university, Howard University in Washington. And he covers D.C., Maryland, Delaware, and West Virginia. And so he goes around to universities and colleges and does what I'm doing, have an open house, goes to career fairs, mentors, talks to students who are thinking about this career, and he can answer questions about what it's like and what you want to think about and what you should do to take the next step to think about it. So I'll say one more thing, because I've been saying a lot and you probably have a lot of questions. There is no one path forward to what career in the international affairs or in the State Department. So if anybody's told you you got to take these classes and you got to do this internship or you never make it, no, don't listen to them. Everybody in the State Department has a different story, and it took them different ways to get to where they are. And some people take a longer pathway than others. About 20% of our workforce are ex-military. Why did they come into the State Department? Well, first of all, there's a veteran's preference in the civil service that gives them a little bit of an edge to apply. But it's also the missions are kind of similar, and they find the State Department seems kind of familiar to them in a lot of ways. A lot of people come in the State Department for a second career. Like I've sworn in the last few Foreign Service officer new classes, and the average age of is in the mid-30s. So that's not to say you can't show up at the age of 26 and come to the State Department. You can, but there are a lot of older folks, older relatively. I'm old. I'm officially old. I'm almost 60. Older than y'all. But so people come to it later in life as a career. So you might walk out of here and say, I ain't doing that. But you know, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, you meet somebody, you're doing something, and you take a trip abroad and say, well, this could be pretty fun. The government's going to pay for me to go overseas. Last thing I should say, when I talked about opportunities. If there is any way at all that you can do it and you're interested in it, I strongly encourage you to do a study abroad program or some overseas experience, because then that will give you a sense of, is this life for me? Am I interested? For me, I did a semester in London when I was in college. It changed my life. It woke me up to this whole wider world. I came from a little town of 30,000 people in upstate New York. I didn't have a passport, and it just completely changed my life. We have a program that can support study abroad if you are Pell Grant eligible. It's called the Gilman Scholarship Program. So that's just another idea to give to you. So let me shut up. Ask me anything you want. I've worked for the President for a long time in the Senate here for the state of Delaware and in the Vice President's office, and now he's appointed me to this job. So if you want to ask about the President or the White House or Secretary of State, any of that stuff, I'm happy to talk about whatever you all want to talk about. Why don't you stand so everybody can hear you?
Yeah. So my question was, all the experience that you have now in business working with college students and high school students, what are some of the steps that you would take if somebody would be interested in
Did everybody hear the question? What are some of the steps that I would take, or looking back, to think about the State Department? Well, as I said, if you can do an overseas thing, whether it's a week or two immersion in language, or a project, or study abroad for a week, a month, a semester, I would highly encourage it so that you can get a taste of it. If you are interested in foreign languages and you have a facility for them, continue to build on that, because having a foreign language is a great skill set to work in the Foreign Service. Because wherever you go in the Foreign Service, most of the jobs require some foreign language skill. We will train you on that language. And some of the harder languages like Mandarin or Japanese or Chinese, that's like 2 years of study. And some officers love this. This is great. I get to go back to school for 2 years and not have to work all the time. But you're working because you're working to study that language. If you already, I should have said, if you already have a language, I was just talking to a gentleman who speaks Arabic. If you're really good in 4 languages, Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, and Portuguese, we have one special entry point. It's called a consular fellow. And for 5 years, all that you do is consular work on interviewing people for visas in an embassy. But then I think you can figure out a way to try to convert and stay in the department after that. So if you have really good language already, native fluency in one of those 4 languages, that's a different pathway. There are lots of different internships in Washington, not just in the State Department, but in international affairs. There's a whole bunch of non-governmental organizations, think tanks. There's lots of different places where you can get a little feel for a flavor of working in international affairs. I think in terms of school, there's nothing you absolutely have to study to work in international affairs. If you want to be a diplomat, I think it's useful to have some history, understanding of history. I think it's useful for everybody to be a good writer and a good communicator. And that's across the board, every job, unless you're digging ditches or doing some manual labor. Having communication skills, being a good writer, being a good oral communicator is very important. And that takes work. I was not a good writer in high school. I was not a good writer in college. I really became a better writer in going to law school. So there's probably lots more to say to that. I don't know.
Building off the last question, what are some skills or skill sets that differentiate civil service applicants from foreign service applicants?
There's not really a great differentiation. It's just that foreign service applicants are volunteering to serve overseas. They must serve overseas. Their first 2 tours, when I use the word tour, they have a tour in a country of 2 or 3 years. So they have, depending on where the country is and how hard of a place to live in, the nicer countries are 3 years. The harder countries to live in are 2 years. Their first 2 tours are overseas, and they don't really get to decide where they go. Later on, they get to decide where they go by a process of bidding. So in the course of your career, you also, in the Foreign Service, you can only serve in Washington 8 consecutive years, and then you must go back overseas. So that's the main difference. I would say in the civil service, there's sometimes specialized jobs, like we have some STEM, we have a number of STEM jobs. We have people work on non-proliferation of dangerous weapons. We have people work on climate change. A lot of those people have advanced degrees in the field that they're working in, and they will stay working in those same jobs, specialties for the duration of their career. Foreign Service kind of moves around to different kinds of jobs over the course of their career. So that's why we call them generalists. They're not specialists in any particular field. That's, in a nutshell, the difference. But.
We have a group of phenomenal young people. Could you speak on the importance of personal and social conduct in their lives now and how it can impact their entry into civil and foreign service jobs?
So pretty much everybody who comes to work in the State Department has to get a security clearance. And what does that involve? It involves you filling out a really detailed application that tells the government all of your family members, the date and place that they were born, where you have lived all of your life, every single address, where you have traveled overseas, have you ever used drugs, have you ever been arrested, have you ever been in bankruptcy or financial default. So they're looking for information about you that could compromise you, that if you're a government employee and you have access to classified information, a foreign government could take advantage of the fact that you have this negative thing in your record and try to get you to turn over secrets. Otherwise, they'll reveal it and get you in trouble. So I didn't have social media in the 1980s when I went to college, so I didn't have to worry about putting some crazy things on social media that would come back to haunt me with job interviews or employers. But I think the basic thing I would say is respect. Respect for yourself and respect for other people, and having a record, personal record of being a good human, in addition to the employment skills, the skills that we've talked about.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. So you kind of talked about it briefly when you discussed that you guys want to create a workforce that's more diverse. I just want to know if you can expand a little bit on what your department is doing to increase the more diversity.
Thank you. So our current Secretary of State, Secretary Blinken, appointed last year a Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. We've never had one of those in the State Department. She's a retired ambassador, African American, who came out of retirement to do this. And it's not just her, but we gave her an office, a team of about 12 people. And she's written a strategic plan which cuts across many aspects of the work of primarily our Human Resources Bureau, of things we need to do to advance the objectives that I've talked about. The paid internships is about encouraging diversity, because we're getting more people from underrepresented communities who can come and have that opportunity and then think about life in the State Department. The fellowship programs I mentioned, those are trying to help us diversify our pipeline. And then within the department, we do okay in recruiting. We're doing less okay on retention and promotion. So we don't really have a very diverse workforce at the most senior levels of ambassadors. And so we're looking at a bunch of things about why that is so. We've incorporated into, when you get in the government, and the private sector has this too, they have, every year you get evaluated on how you're doing your job, right? It's a written evaluation typically. So we've incorporated into our performance evaluation how each individual officer is advancing DEIA objectives. So we're trying to ingrain it in the DNA of the department and make clear that it's a priority for everybody. One of the complaints in the department is that job opportunities are not always transparent. They're opaque, and people are getting jobs because of who they know, not because of their abilities. So we're trying to make sure that the bidding and interview processes as people go to different jobs in the Foreign Service are more transparent and more objective. So setting up panels so there's 3 or 4 people instead of one person making a decision. They're asking everyone the same question. So different ways we're trying to filter out bias that creeps into hiring processes. It's going to take work. There's a bunch of humans involved, so we're not always going to get it right. But it's a big priority for the Secretary, and he's made that clear to everyone. I met you. Your name is Maya. I don't remember your last name. Yeah. Darion or Coco, you want to help me with that one? I'm not sure. So I got 2 lifelines here. Darion, who I mentioned, and Coco is a Foreign Service officer who works temporarily in my office. She's filling in for somebody who's on vacation this week. So she's worked for me for all of 2 days. So did you all hear that question? Because I'm not sure I have the good answer to that one. Good answer. Better than I could have given. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, thank you for coming. I wanted to ask, what is a typical day, like, in your workplace look like, and how is the workplace environment?
So a typical day for me is I get to the office around 7, and I go home at around, I'm sorry, 8, not 7. I worked in the Defense Department, my last government job. I occasionally went in 7 or 7:30 there, or even 6 o'clock to go to the gym. So I get in around 8. I read some materials for the day, including a classified, it's actually on an iPad, it's not a binder, classified reports that come to senior government officials every morning. And I'm focused in particular on threats to our embassies and our personnel, because there's always some of them somewhere. And then we usually have a number of meetings of the senior staff. Secretary of State will come if he's in town to go over what everybody's doing that day to make sure everybody's knows what's up and make sure we don't trip over each other. And then in my case, because my job is, we have 2 deputy secretaries. One is really focused on a lot of the policy issues. I'm the deputy for management and resources. So I manage our budget. I manage the budget of the Agency for International Development. And we have a undersecretary for management who works under me and reports to me, but I also work on management issues, so I coordinate with him or work on broad department-wide issues that kind of need a higher lift. So it's a lot of, for me, it's a lot of internal meetings, maybe phone calls with some people at the White House or members of Congress, because we're always working with the budget office at the White House or with people in Congress on our budget, either money we've asked for in the current year or money they've already given us, and we have to explain how we're allocating. So it's a lot of time thinking about money and where it's going and making decisions about how we should spend it. People who work on the diplomatic side are their day is reading report in Washington. Their day is reading reports from overseas, going to meetings internally or with at the White House under what's called the National Security Council system, developing our policies of the administration, meeting with embassy people who work in embassies in Washington and foreign countries who will come into the State Department for meetings, or visiting officials from foreign countries. So today the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense are having an all-day meeting with their counterparts from Australia. So all the people who work on the Australia desk, they've been getting ready for this for a month, writing all the papers and thinking about how this meeting ought to go. And it will culminate today in that session. So, you know, there's thousands of people in the department all doing different things every day, depending on what their job is. What is the atmosphere? Is that what you asked? But, you know, there's what I found in the government. Let me say it this way: when I left the Department of Defense in the Obama administration in 2017, I was a political appointee of President Obama. So when President Trump got elected, they said, "Thank you for your service. Goodbye. Give us your badge. Please leave." Which is fine. That's how it works. I was asked by a lot of people, "Do you miss it?" And I said, "Well, I worked for 8 years for President Obama. I was pretty tired, so I didn't really miss the work, but I really missed the people, because the teammates in the Pentagon and the White House and in the State Department, it's just amazing. Just a lot of really smart people, really mission-driven. Most of them work together well, not everybody. And so that part of it's fun, because you're always learning from people, learning about new issues. And, you know, mostly people are professional and try to work together and cooperate to get to an outcome. But, you know, there's people that in any workplace who are not always nice and as professional and as cooperative, and occasionally people are what would be fairly called bullies, and we're trying to change that culture.
Thank you very much for the time and the opportunity. I'm feeling excited because I heard you mention several times about Chinese American, because I'm from China, but I went to confirm that requiring U.S. citizen or green passport.
you have to be a U.S. citizen to get a security clearance. So you pretty much have to be a U.S. citizen to work at the State Department. I can do a couple more unless, one more. This is always dangerous because whenever I speak and I say one more question, it's always the hardest question of the day. And I'm like, oh, should have stopped. All right, I see two hands up, so let me do two quick ones. You first. So the question was, what were the obstacles as I came into the position, and how did I overcome some of those obstacles? So to actually get this position, President Biden had to nominate me and send my nomination to the United States Senate, and then I had to go through a process in the United States Senate called confirmation, where I had to go sit in front of a bunch of senators on the Foreign Relations Committee and answer questions from them, and also do meetings in advance with some of them. Or the staff of the committee. So it was kind of a long gauntlet that I had to run just to get the job. But I worked in the Senate at the same committee for 12 years, so I kind of knew the deal. And it was hard, but it wasn't not that hard. I think once I got into the job, what was new was I had never worked at the State Department except for during transition team after President Biden was elected and after President Obama was elected, but that was a very short period. So I had a lot to learn about the State Department and what had happened to it during the Trump administration. And I think there were a couple things I found that were difficult. One, we had a very tired workforce, and I also heard often the term PTSD because there was a lot of drama under President Trump. I'm trying to be nonpartisan here. I would use a different term in front of a Democratic audience. And people were just tired from the pandemic. You know, pandemic's been hard on everybody. And people who have kids and sustaining jobs, I don't know how they do it. My wife and I don't have children. But everybody's suffered something under the pandemic, either getting sick themselves or having relatives who get sick or have died or have gone into decline. And in my case, my mother-in-law's 2.5 years ago, she was a very vibrant 95-year-old who walked with a cane and was still intellectually curious. And now she's a 97-year-old who's in a wheelchair and her dementia has advanced, and that's because of isolation in the pandemic. She lives in a nursing home and was locked in her room a lot. So everybody's suffered, and so people are just tired. And so trying to energize the workforce and get them to believe that we were invested in their future, you know, I think we've probably run into a little bit of skepticism. And we've made big efforts to try to invest in the workforce and rebuild it in some ways, and we have filled a lot of vacancies that we inherited under President Trump. The other issue that we continue to grapple with is because of some of what went on under President Trump, but also in other previous administrations. There's a culture of not taking risk in the State Department. People don't feel empowered because they don't think their bosses will have their backs. So that's a long-term conversation that we're trying to have, and to convince the workforce to take some risk and to innovate, because we need everybody to do that, not just the leadership. So that's a long answer and probably not very satisfying. So there's one other question over here. I know my staff said one more, but you're the last one.
Oh, technically I have like 3 questions.
3 questions, no way. That's called cheating. So if you ever watch press conferences with the president, whether it's President Biden or President Obama or President, reporters do that all the time. They ask multiple questions. Like, wait a minute, you got called on for one question. All right, go ahead.
Well, my name is Lindsay Fonda. I attend Darion high school at DSU and major in psychology. Briefly earlier you spoke about student programs. Could you elaborate on what careers you'd be able to pursue through those? My second question is, I applied to NSIY this year. Do you know when or if you want to have more information, or if you have like more questions, is there any like contact information or website we should go to?
So, working backwards. The website is careers.state.gov. That has all the information about fellowship programs and internship programs and applying for the Foreign Service and the Civil Service. Contact information is Mr. Darion Akins. I always want to put a T in there. Yeah, I'm sorry. Darion is our local recruiter for Delaware. He's based at Howard U, but he's here for all of you. What is the second one? NSIY? I didn't understand that. What is that? I don't.
It's the high school program for study abroad. It's an actual program.
I'm not familiar with it, so I don't. Do you know, Darren? What is? So I've already forgotten your first question. The student programs, what careers they lead to? They don't. Well, the internship program doesn't. It's not automatic. You're not going to get. You're not automatically going to come back to the State Department. You come. You work for 10 weeks. You get assigned to a particular bureau or embassy in the department, and you're not just Xeroxing and running errands. You're doing substantive work, attending meetings, taking notes, writing up those meetings, making phone calls, giving advice, learning about the State Department and contributing to its work. Particularly overseas in the summer, the interns are crucial because when people end their tour, you remember I talked earlier about tours of duty, and they move to a new post or back to Washington. We do that in the summer because for people with kids. So in the summer there's always vacancies because the new officer doesn't always arrive before the leaving officer leaves. So an internship is kind of you get a taste of it, this is the life for me, and then maybe you'll apply to come back later. The fellowship programs that I mentioned, and those are on our website, if you win the lottery and you get into these fellowship programs, they're pretty competitive. We will pay $42,000 a year for your graduate school, and then you owe us 5 years of service in the Foreign Service. And then we hope you'll stay longer than 5 years. But I think that's what you're asking? Yeah, okay. All right, so last thing I will say, I know I've said that a couple of times. So, for those of you, even those of you who are seniors, your parents probably don't want me to say this. It's okay if you haven't figured it out yet. When I was second semester senior year, I didn't know what I was going to do. I applied to grad school. I wanted to go back to Washington because I had interned in the Senate for my senator, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So and I watched all the business majors, the accountants, finance majors. They all had jobs. They were busy partying. They weren't worried about their grades their last semester. You'll figure it out. Second thing I'd say is, back to why I'm here, all new employees in the State Department or in any job, you'll encounter this in a new job. You'll experience something that might be called imposter syndrome, which is how the heck did I get here and do I belong? And I'll tell you a story. President Truman, if you've heard of him, he was president after Roosevelt. When he came to the United States Senate from Kansas City, he was looking around kind of bewildered, and a senator came up to him and said, "Harry, for the first 6 months you're going to wonder how you got here. After that you're going to wonder how the rest of us got here." So when you go into a new job, whether it's here on campus or in the summer, and you think, do I belong? It's okay to have those feelings. Don't sweat it. I've had that in every new job. When I went from the White House, which is pretty big deal, to the Pentagon, I was like, what am I doing here? So it's okay to have those feelings, but you belong because you've been chosen for it. So, take a couple days to have those feelings and that anxiety, and then try to get them out of your head and dive in. But you belong because you were chosen to be there. So I thank you all for listening. I wish you good luck on your exams, and for those of you who've goofed off all semester, you better get to work. Been there. And, Darion is here as a resource if you're thinking about this, whether it's next week, next month, next year, and whatever you do in life, I'm sure it'll be great. I'm going to break this if I put it in, so I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Watson, the Associate Provost for Academic and Student Services. This was a treat, was it not? We got some really good information, and I'm so excited. Something that Deputy Secretary McKeon said was take risk, and that's something that no one told me when I was coming out of college or high school. So I love Gen Z because you guys take risk, right? If you're born, if you grew up in the 80s, we didn't take very many risks. But take the risk, and this is a great opportunity that has been presented to you today. So I hope you all take advantage of this opportunity and the diversity of opportunities that have been presented. So Deputy, thank you so much for visiting Delaware State University. Diplomat Akins, thank you so much for arranging this with Ms. Craig. I have to acknowledge Ms. Danielle Craig, the Associate Director for URELA, and Ms. Shonda Poe, the Director for URELA. Thank you so much for your efforts in pulling this together. Deputy, we have a gift for you from the President's office. So don't worry about that. You're safe. Thank you so very much. Diplomat Akins, could you please come forward? And we thank you for reaching out to Delaware State University. It's less than $25 for making this happen. When you work for the government, you can't receive gifts more than $25.
The deputy made sure I reached out. It was his initiative.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I worked with your president, Dr. Allen, in Senator Biden's office, and having worked for the president in the Senate for 20 years, and knowing that it's a short drive, I figured I just kind of had to come to Delaware at least once while I was in the State Department, or the president would be mad at me. And I didn't want that.
Absolutely, and we're so grateful. Thank you. The other thing I want to say is to maximize this opportunity, maximize the time. I'm in my 50s now, and I can't regain the time that I lost in not taking risks. So time lost cannot be regained. So take advantage of this opportunity. If you get stuck doing the jobs.gov application, I have a little bit of experience with that, so I could probably help you navigate through that. So thank you. And yes, absolutely.
Very quickly, from 4 to 5 today, I will be available in the class lounge. If you have more specific, in-depth questions that you want to ask, please find me, or you can find me on LinkedIn. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you. There are some refreshments in the back for the students. I believe we're going to have some photo sessions with the deputy and the diplomat, with our photographer. And do you have the students?